Okay. So I'll repeat that. So welcome everyone. This is the 5th meeting. It's the last, effectively, of the main discussions, and we've been looking at the information we've been receiving from various ways. And at the end, I'll mention the final, planned final meeting, which will be the 6th, which will be fairly soon. It has been quite a while for both COVID and indeed the Ofsted inspection, which has caused a bit of a hiccup in the timing. But there we are. That's life in today's world. So welcome everyone, and great to see everybody here. Okay, so in terms of the minutes, we have the minutes here. Does anybody, are we happy to approve these? Okay, we do have some action points. I'll find them all. Here we go. So right at the end, there was, I think, about 4 or 5 action points. So, Steph, do you want? So, the first one is about the SENCO network and British Sign Language.
Yep, so I can update on that. We've been in contact with our SENCOs who supported the completion of the Young People's Survey, and they're going to come back to us with a little paragraph about the work that they've been doing with young people who need BSL interpretation and how they supported them. We also have some lovely news. We know that there's been a new group that started for young people in our community with hearing impairment issues. So there'll be lots more opportunities for us to work directly with that group of young people. So lots of interesting progress in this space.
Oh, thanks very much. Good. That's good news. Second point, Hugh Jones is going to prepare information for the final reports to bring us up to date. And also, he's going to present to Steph some information to pass on. Do you want to say any more about that, Steph? Or?
Yep, so Hugh and I have been working on our dashboard with all of the information that we think would be really helpful for the SEN Commission final report, and that includes obviously the comments of colleagues in the last meeting as well. So we're just in the process of collating all of that. Some of that work's been happening through the Education Partnership Board and also through the SEND and Inclusion subgroup. So we will have that ready for the final report.
Okay, thanks. Hugh, I see you're here. Did you want to add anything to that?
No, that was Steph covered that perfectly
Lovely.
well. I'm happy with that.
Thanks very much, Hugh. And finally, I'm not sure if John Rook is here, but that's, I think, is in hand. Steph, do you want to say anything on that, please?
So John's going to send us a further update on this, but we know that the GP network have been part of this work. There's been some training for GPs around transitions between children's services and adult services, so they are engaged in the wider work that the Commission's doing.
Okay, many thanks. Good. Does anybody else have any matters arising that aren't on the agenda? Can't see anything. No, okay, good. So we come on to the first main item of the agenda. This is the high needs. Now, where's Emma? I can't see Emma.
Hello, here I am, Jeff.
Oh, there you are.
Hidden in a little corner of your screen, obviously.
No, I'm actually, you're actually not far from the middle, but I've been looking around the edges. So. Okay. Emma, thanks very much for all the work you've done. I know it's a huge amount of work. Would you mind just leading us on this this item, please?
Yeah, so I'll share my screen and we'll have a look at the PowerPoints. If I can get the right document.
Emma, I'm happy to share on your behalf if that's
Oh,
easier.
yeah, thank you. I was coming up with some security notice or something, I think, because I'm not on the Newham network. Thank you. So there's a report that's accompanying this presentation. So I just want to take you through really some of the highlights of this, because I assume you've had all of these documents in your papers. So for those of you that haven't met me, I'm Emma Ferry. I'm the High Needs Implementation Lead. And what that means is that I'm looking at how we can ensure that we recover the deficit. So that's part of my work. And then within that, focusing on invest to save opportunities, improving outcomes for children. So this is the sort of work that I've done in a number of local authorities. So if we can go on to the first slide, please, Steph. So as you'll probably be aware, most local authorities have a deficit, and Newham is no different to that. The deficit is currently at around 15 million, and what the DfE have asked local authorities to do is to bring their spending with it in line with their budgets for 21-22, and then draw up a recovery plan for the next 3 to 5 years in terms of how that deficit will be recovered. They've asked that those plans are realistic but ambitious, which, you know, is pretty standard. What we've gone back to the DfE with is a 6-year plan, and we've asked whether they would find that acceptable, and they've said yes, they would, as long as it is ambitious. But we just felt it gave us enough space for it actually to be realistic. So we've had deficit recovery plans before, but really it was more of a number crunching exercise rather than a really kind of thought through process in terms of what that might actually mean for different services. And we were very keen to make sure that we were still investing in our local provision and making that the first choice for children and families. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So these figures are out of date, because actually I've been working on the high needs review and revising that, and I've had more up-to-date data, so apologies for that, and I'm sure Hugh will be tearing his hair out when he's looking at these numbers, but I think
Got none left, Emma, it's okay.
But overall it gives us a general sense, you know, the proportions are still pretty valid in terms of what we're looking at, in that really we know that the significant portion of our children with high needs, and whether they have an EHCP or not, have autism, and that is continuing to increase. When we've looked at our projection data, the numbers of children with speech and language needs, particularly with autism, continues to increase. We've also then been looking at how we support place planning across the local authority. So again, it's thinking about what our occupancy is in resource provisions in our special schools. And there's some work there that we think we need to do to address occupancy. So we want to make sure that we're maximising our resource provisions, and I'll talk you through some of the measures that we're already introducing. We're already seeing some success with that's going on and to tackle that. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. So this just breaks down what our resource provisions offer. So in case people don't know, resource provisions are attached to mainstream schools, and they're a specialist setting where children can spend a portion of their time not in mainstream classes, in classrooms and classes, and with support that's specifically set up to meet their needs. So as you will see, we've got a number of resource provisions across primary and secondary phases. Some of them offer post-16 provisions, so sixth forms, and the majority of those are focused on autism, so ASD, and we also have a number on cognition and learning needs. That's what CLN stands for. So those ones are focused on children with profound and multiple learning difficulties, that's PMLD, and severe learning difficulties, that's SLD. We also have, if you see SEMH, that's social, emotional and mental health. So we have that as well. Okay, next slide, please. So our numbers in out of borough have been going up. So you can see there over the past, just a 3-year snapshot, from 16 in 2018-19 up to 63 in 2020 to 2021. And while some of those children that are being educated in out of borough provision are in maintained provision, so it's not necessarily that they're in independent placements, and some of those maybe just because they happen to live on the border of Newham and actually their nearest school is over the border. So it's not necessarily to say that out of borough provision is something that we don't want to use, we do. And also for some children, independent and non-maintained places are the right provision for them. So we need to be clear on that when we're talking about out of borough placements. But what we do want to make sure is that we're not sending children to out of borough placements where actually they want an in borough placement. So those are the things that we're kind of trying to balance when we're looking at how we develop our in borough provision. And when I've done a kind of dip sample of why children have ended up out of borough, around 60%, so over half, are because we've been unable to offer a placement, find a placement in a local school. So that to me is a cause of concern, because they are children and families that wanted to be educated in borough. So there's definitely some work to do around addressing that. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So this just gives you an idea of the kind of costs that we're talking about. So as I said, some of those children who are going out of borough, so OLA stands for other local authority. So they might be going to another local authority's mainstream provision, resource provision or special school. Those costs compare reasonably well to what we would pay for in-borough provision for our own maintained provision. But when we look at the independent and non-maintained costs, they are significantly higher. So obviously it's pretty clear to see that the more children we're sending to those independent and non-maintained provisions, the more of a cost that is and an impact on the high needs block. So that is something that we certainly want to address. And again, when I've looked at it, there are, I would say over half of those children actually wanted in-borough placements, and we've been unable to place them. So that is something we urgently need to address in order to start to really make an impact on that deficit recovery. If we could go to the next slide, please. So I've been working with Jessica as the head of SEND, as well as Peter Gibb, who is the head of place planning and school planning. And we've been looking at building on the work of the SEND Commission to talk to stakeholders, so talking to head teachers and SENCOs in schools, talking to early years providers, and talking to parents and carers about what our new provision might look like. So really focusing on not necessarily what's going wrong, because we've heard that through the SEND Commission and through other forums. So I think we're clear on what Newham needs to change, but it's what that change starts to look like. So we asked stakeholders what they thought about a focus on an improved approach to what's ordinarily available in schools and mainstream settings, looking at successful elements of the pilot support offer, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a moment, expansion of the banding matrix, I'll talk about that, and then looking really at a wider approach to training and CPD and whole school approaches, how we support schools in order to do that, improving our data and projections. So I think that work again is already starting to happen, and it's how we build on that. And then looking at whether we need to increase our specialist provision places. So in terms of the pilot support offer, This is work with 3 of our secondary schools that have a resource provision for autism. And the reason that we started working with these 3 schools was that they were individually all telling us the same thing, that they were struggling to recruit teaching assistants. If they managed to recruit them, they were struggling to retain them. And they were also finding that they had pupils with very high levels of need, so quite complex autism, and staff in the school were struggling to support those pupils adequately. So what we've done with those schools is look at a mixed approach. So some of that is funded by the local authority, some of it is funded by the schools themselves. So we've developed some peer support, so the head teachers coming together, and I think that has been a real success. The fact that they now understand it's not just their school that's facing these challenges, and there's definitely been some progress just around the schools coming together to talk about that. We are starting to look at a model for a centralised recruitment process, working with NPW, so that they take some of the burden of time that's taken up recruiting teaching assistants. We're also, one of the head teachers is leading on negotiating with agencies so that they could perhaps get a favourable deal across the 3 schools. So we'll see how that shakes down. The schools have asked for some training and CPD, so we are, the local authority is paying for them to, for their resource provision leads and for their SENCOs to undertake maximising the impact of TAs training, and TAs themselves will then will undertake training called maximising the performance of TAs. So that's space for up to 80 teaching assistants across the 3 schools. And then also the 3 schools will be working very closely with JFK, so John F. Kennedy, our special school, around an approach to teaching children with autism, as well as looking at having a curriculum that's common across those 3 schools, and potentially with JFK as well. So that work is ongoing in terms of the pilot, and I think all of that is showing real progress, and the schools are feeling very happy with that. In terms of the matrix, I've got I met with all the head teachers from resource provision schools and special schools were invited to a meeting. From that meeting, they've agreed to set up a small task and finish group. So I think I've got 7 head teachers there. And they're currently looking at models for expanding the matrix. So we introduced a banding matrix in December 2020 for children in mainstream, but that matrix doesn't really work for children in resource provisions and special schools. So this work is now going ahead to look at how we expand that matrix so that it is appropriate for those children. And we've got a meeting next week with Southend, who've recently introduced a model that the task and finish group are interested in. So Southend are coming to talk to us about how we might develop that, which I think will be very interesting. So they were just 2 key pieces of work that I wanted to bring to the attention of the SEND Commission, because I know that Jeff has been, has said that work is continuing. We're not just waiting for the SEND Commission report, but we've been working alongside that and listening to the feedback that's come out through the SEND Commission. So if we can move on to the next slide, please, Steph. So the CPD development, and again, this has changed just in this last week in discussions with Peter Gibb and what models might look like. But the idea really is to support schools and settings around specific themes for the local authority to have input, but also for there to be a clear mechanism for peer-to-peer support, whether that's head teachers, whether it's resource provision leads, whether it's SENCOs, whoever it may be, about how we start to facilitate that. So I think this is just a very sort of early thoughts in terms of what those models of support might look like. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So I just wanted to give you really a brief kind of timetable of what we think we're going to be looking at. So we've got still some more data work to do around projection data for early years and school age, and that work has pretty much taken place, but we're refining that data as we get better data. Post-16 analysis is in progress, and I'm hoping to be able to meet with post-16 providers and again get their input in terms of how we develop provision. Projection data, again, we've had a look at projection data over the next 5 years. We're in the process of analysing how that measures up to our current capacity as well as our planned capacity with the new free school coming on stream in 23-24. And then for next month, we'll be looking at really developing a bit more of a specific model that ensures that our capacity will meet our projected demand. And then those proposals will go to the School Capital Investment Board in late February. So they're the kind of key steps in terms of that place planning next steps. And then I'd also sent around some slides just about some of the stakeholder feedback that we'd got. I was very keen to not ask questions that the SEND Commission had already covered. So that's slightly different feedback, but I'm conscious of time and I don't really know how long I've got for this presentation. So I'm happy to sort of leave it there if you want, Jeff, because people will have that information anyway.
Okay, Emma, unless you want to say just for a minute or so about the feedback.
Yeah, so the feedback was really helpful, and I think what we really wanted to do was get a sense from stakeholders about what we should now be doing. What should our provision look like? And I think you know, as you'd expect in Newham, there were very different views about inclusion versus specialist placements. But overall, I think people did recognise that you know, some settings, some schools are struggling with the numbers of children they've got with high needs and the level of complexity of needs of some of those pupils. And that's one of the reasons that we developed the pilot with the resource provisions, was really what support could we put in place so that those children have those opportunities to be in mainstream or be in resource provisions, where parents and children and young people don't want to be in a specialist setting. So I think we're trying to continue to ensure that Newham has that mixed approach and that flexibility and the choice for children and their families. So that was sort of the driver of the feedback.
Okay, many thanks. Well, that's great. Well, thanks. That was a huge amount of work and really interesting, very comprehensive. Can I try open? Anyone want to make any, ask any questions first, or make comments on this issue and what Emma's been telling us?
Yes, Jeff. I'm sorry not to surprise anyone, but I do have a couple of comments and questions. I think that was extremely helpful. I think it is illustrative of I think one of the challenges that Emma's probably too polite to say is that it's very difficult presenting clear data given how inaccurate some of the data has been in previous years. It would be lovely and really helpful if we had some graphs to show us the trends in numbers in more detailed ways, but schools' experience of asking for data about SEND in previous years has been, there's been a huge disparity often between what we see on spreadsheets coming from the local authority and what we actually have in front of us. You know, yesterday I was in a meeting where it showed 14 students being in the Lister resource provision when I know that currently there are 20. There are lots of reasons for this, but what I think worries me a little bit is making decisions about capital projects without having a clearer analysis of two things. I think the overall trends in numbers as pupils move through the system is one that I don't feel collectively we've got a clear enough view on. There was a very interesting slide which Emma showed, which was the numbers of students in mainstream and in resource provisions at primary and secondary. I don't know if it's possible to put that slide up again, but what is staggering about it in some ways is how much bigger the numbers are in primary. And you know, as a practitioner and somebody who deals with SEND all the time, I don't entirely understand why that is, because there is one obvious point, which is that if a student, you know, we know that it's sometimes difficult to get assessments done, so it can take quite a long time into a student's career in school before they are identified. So you would almost understand if there was a higher proportion of students in secondary. So what does it mean that we are seeing those numbers? Are those numbers going to carry on moving through the system? Because that's hugely important for the decisions that we make. And it worries me that we don't have that clear analysis. The other thing that I think we need to know and to understand is there are lots of reasons for decisions about whether we have more specialist places or not. For me, the most important thing is that by having more specialist places, we have more specialist teachers. We have more people who are able, who have the skills required. And it's not, for me, it's not about the label on the setting. It's about students having access to the quality of trained teaching and specialist input that they need. But there is a financial factor. It's now being stated as a commonplace that of course you get more money when you have more special schools, and I've seen spreadsheets showing us getting a lot more money into Newham with the special schools arriving, but we don't have a projection. You know, I haven't seen an analysis saying if we were to get another special school in the borough, it would bring in this much extra funding. How much difference would that make? And I think we need to know that as collectively before we're taking final decisions about, for example, how capital is spent. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony. Emma, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I'm just making notes because I think they're good questions, but I take Anthony's point about are we identifying autism earlier in primary schools, and I would hope we are getting better systems, and therefore what we're seeing is an accurate reflection of what's actually happening, and therefore our assumptions are that what that means is that we are going to have significant pressure on secondary schools when these cohorts of children move up to secondary school. So I think that is a real issue, and something that, you know, we really need to think very carefully about in terms of how we develop staff, the staffing that we have in schools, etc. So I take that point, and I think it would be helpful to have some more detail on that data so that we can confirm or not what we're seeing. And then in terms of the additional funding, yeah, we can certainly do that. I can work with Richard to look at what that would mean for the overall budget that comes into Newham, and what impact that has on schools as a whole.
Okay, thanks, Emma. Was that helpful, Anthony?
Yes, it'd be very helpful to see that. You know, I mean, I don't want to underline the point, but if there is that significant extra cohort coming through, they're coming through in a situation where we already have an issue that schools, you know, that some students are not able to get places in secondaries. So
yeah, which is why then we would be looking at you know, what we can do with our capital investment, and also then what we're doing to support schools in terms of staff capacity, staff training, etc., etc. So yeah, that's, you know, we need to be confident in what our data is actually telling us, but then I think we're already starting to put that thinking into place in terms of how we address that.
I suppose there's one thing to add from me, Jeff, which is I know a lot of people on this call have already heard it, but I think everybody should be aware that about the strength of feeling that there is among school leaders, certainly at the SEND subgroup, that given financial constraints and these capacity issues we're talking about, there is one area where there is capacity in the system, which is those schools which are currently not taking a very high number of high needs funded students. So, you know, the only win for the system that is relatively achievable would be if schools that are not taking significant numbers of high need students were to be persuaded to do so.
Okay, yes, good point. Thanks very much. Okay, that's great. Thanks very much for that. Anyone else have any questions or comments?
Hi, Jeff. I just wanted to add to
Thank you.
Anthony's first point, and Emma following up on that about the increase in early identification. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge at this point, whilst planning for the future, that yes, early identification is a factor. Increased awareness and diagnostics of young people with additional and complex needs. But there is also unmistakably an increase in number of young people. There's quite a lot of evidence out there pointing to correlations between premature birth and young people being kept alive who previously would not have been, and the impact that has in later life in terms of complex learning needs. And so medical advancements are going to mean that there is an inevitable trajectory and an increase in numbers of young people with more additional and more complex needs. And we need to be planning for that.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I think that's a really valid point, and I think we're already seeing the effects of that. And as I say, post-16 will be a key area that we need to look at. So I've just noticed Gower's comment as well about post-16, and I think that's, you know, again, where we need to get much better at gathering our data and looking at what provision we have and what else we need, because obviously as all of these children grow up and come through our system, we need to make sure that we've got the right provision in place. And some of that, again, is working with adult services. So in other local authorities, you know, children's services have worked very closely with adults to look at what provision can be put in place for example, young adults with very complex levels of autism, for example, which adult services historically really wouldn't have seen. So that's, you know, some of the things that we will be looking at, because absolutely, whilst we want to get the early intervention and early notification right, we also know that we want children to move into a meaningful adult life, whatever that looks like for that particular individual. And we need to make sure that those pathways are there and are clear for them to follow.
Okay, thanks, Emma. That raises the issue of colleges, and sixth form colleges and Newham College. And I visited both of those the other week, so there's certainly some issues there which I've already started to raise. Now, has anyone else got any? Oh, we've got some hands here. Kirsty, I'm going to move. It's Kirsty, and then Marie, and then I think Tim. Sorry, yes, my chat had covered you up. Sorry.
No worries. Yeah, thanks, Emma. I know we've looked at some of this together. I'm just not sure with this group in mind if we've really even started to touch the surface around the transientness and the issues around families newly arrived, which I know has put a lot of pressure on. So just to give an example, when I spot checked for transition for summer term into September, some of the concerns raised by primary schools, which I think links back to Anthony's point about that increase in primary, for those that didn't have a smooth transition or had no support in place, were actually newly arrived to the borough. So, and you know, Sarah, I know we've got the challenges around the hotel children, and some are going into primary school with quite complex needs and no paperwork. So I think whilst it's great that we're doing this mapping, I do wonder, with the influence of this group, how we really are going to try and start to understand this process for children who are newly arrived, who are coming with quite large complexities and no support in place. And I think they are putting a pressure on the system, and those children rightly need support early. And I don't think we've really got a handle on that at the moment. So I just wonder how we are going to get a handle on it, really, because this I don't see this issue going away at the moment, to be honest.
No, that's a good point. Thanks very much. Marie?
Thanks, Jeff. To add on to Kirsty's comment and also Jim's as well, I think we've probably got quite a lot of information and intelligence in health with regards to some of these children from a particularly early age. And I'm thinking, Kirsty, with regards to some of the cohorts you're talking about, if they become looked after or unaccompanied. So we'll have probably quite a lot of intelligence and should probably be feeding that in a more effective way individually, but also the trends that we're seeing. I'd really mirror the fact that we know our sort of caseload, for instance, with continuing care is just growing leaps and bounds and has doubled in as many years. And the other question I was actually going to ask back for Emma was with regards to the children who have been placed out of borough in the different settings. Have we done any sort of analysis on why we think they were placed out of borough? What the reasonings behind that? Is there any sort of themes coming through that would be helpful for us to see?
Yeah, thanks, Marie. It's a good question because I did start to look at that. So we had an out of borough task and finish group that has slightly fallen by the wayside with the departure of Ruth. But the works of that is still ongoing because it sits within the SEN team. But I'd asked Ruth for to sort of do a dip. I did a dip sample of cases. And what I found was that certainly well over half of those children weren't offered a place in borough due to the effective education of other pupils in the school. And some of that was responses from mainstream schools and resource provisions. And then sometimes from special school, the response was around not having a class size. You know, they keep, obviously class size is quite small, and therefore that class size for that particular age of child or need of child was already filled. So some of it is about capacity. Well, I think most of it actually is about capacity. So again, that was a bit of a driver behind that pilot, looking at with the resource provisions. And then I think moving forward, you know, how we work with our special schools and build some flexibility into the system, because going back to Kirsty's point, we know that we have children coming into the borough mid-year, mid-phase, mid-term, and we need to have that flex within the system to meet those needs. But certainly in terms of children going out of borough, well over half was because we didn't have the capacity in our current system.
Okay, thanks very much. That's great. It's important as well. Tim, over to you.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Jeff. Just briefly, firstly, thank you to Emma and colleagues who've completed this work. It's really very helpful. And for all the reasons that have been stated today, it's really important. I think we've got a clear sort of strategic view of how we're going to remain, or we're going to become, I should say, more sufficient locally moving forwards. Just a couple of things I wanted to add. I totally agree with Anthony's point about the importance of the accuracy of data and doing all we can to ensure it is as accurate and as helpful as it can be. And I know that we're working with public health colleagues as part of the next phase of the joint strategic needs assessment, and asking them for a particular analysis on some of the drivers for increases in children with special educational needs. So we're asking them to do some analysis about what some of the causes and drivers are, and that might be able to help answer some of the questions we've had today. I think also totally understand the focus on further education, and there is some joint work going on between adult social care and children's services. I know Emma referred to that in other local authorities. We certainly are now working with adult social care to really understand need and to develop those pathways, as Emma suggested. And finally, although, you know, it is some time off, I'm sure, the last conversation that Anita and I had with the Regional Schools Commissioner in terms of new provision she referred to the possibility of another wave of free schools, which would include a focus on special schools. So again, I don't know if Anita's got any more details about the timing of that, or whether that's indeed has been confirmed. And even if we were successful, clearly a new special school would be some time off, but certainly there's a recognition in Newham, and we've shared that with the Regional Schools Commissioner. We feel we still have a requirement for more special school places, and would be looking to expand the provision with every opportunity that comes along. So Anita, I don't know if you want to add anything there.
No, thanks, Tim. I think that's covered it. But apart from the fact that we'll continue to raise that, they'll keep that pin in the office of the Regional Schools Commissioner, as we believe there is a need for that. But just going back to your point, Tim, and also Anthony's, the accuracy of the data is what's going to really help our case, and have that clarity about what our priorities are. So I know lots of work is happening in the background to get to a more accurate position to support more robust forecasting.
Okay, thanks very much, Tim and Anita. Carleen, Carleen, you have your hand up as well.
Thank you, Chair.
Over to you, thanks.
Thank you. Just in relation to the slide pack that we received, I just wanted to understand of the 1,775 children that we're accounting for in regards to high needs funding, and of which 65% of those children have autism. I'm just wondering, where are we counting the children that are not in education? Is that figure also here somewhere, or is it not included?
So I was just looking at high needs funding because that's my remit. So I think some of that data will be in the alternative provision review. And that was completed towards the end of last year, I think maybe November.
Okay.
Because obviously there will be a number of those children who have special educational needs and disabilities as well.
Right, thank you.
I think what we'll do though is take that away as an action to have a combined set there.
Yeah,
Thanks for pointing that out. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. I think we need to move on now. Is that okay? Yeah, we've got some interesting and some very helpful comments in the chat as well.
Jeff, I think we do have one more hand up. Oka
okay.
has a hand up.
Okay. Mine says Oka NPF on my screen.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I just wanted to make note of not forgetting those children with dyspraxia, dyscalculia, or dyslexia. I think we are focusing a lot on autism and more complex needs, but we don't want to forget that those children with those needs do also struggle. Children with dyspraxia are struggling with a physical and also mental, because it could affect them in how they write, which can be misunderstood for dyslexia. And so there's a lot there, and it affects our children's mental health and how they maneuver around school.
I think that's a really good point, Oka, and I did reply to yours, but another question came in, so it looks like I didn't reply to yours, but I did. And yes, you're absolutely right. We need to make sure that we don't lose sight of any of those needs, because all of those children, all our children need to be supported to move into a successful adulthood. So that's absolutely right. Thank you, Oka.
Yeah, thanks very much. And your notes are in the chat as well. So we'll keep all of these are going to be important in the chat, as well as what's said in the meeting. So great, thanks so much, and very important points across the board there. And thanks everyone for your comments, and that's been really very helpful. If we move on to the next item, Steph, you're going to give us something on this, some comments on the stakeholder feedback.
Cool. Not having much luck. Give me 1 second and hopefully we can get this presentation working, but it will have been in your meeting slide pack. So we had it attached to the invite just for anyone that wants to get it up on their own screen. Here we go. Right, so just a very quick recap. As Jeff spoke about earlier, this is the kind of final themed commission session, and our focus today has very much been on funding and provision. So when Jeff conducted his initial interviews with stakeholders and partners, there were a few issues that came up in this discussion, and that's what we've been exploring kind of further in the feedback. So there was very much a feeling that there may not be the equity in our current offer and our commissioning models. We know very much, obviously Emma's just spoken to us about the high needs budget overspend and wanting to understand and unpick the reasons for that. Stakeholders spoke to us about the impact of the historic policy on non-mainstream provision, so understanding that kind of journey to where we are now. The effectiveness of our provision, and also the confidence that our providers have in supporting children with very different and complex needs. Our national funding formula, so understanding again that impact and history, and understanding Newham's high needs funded model and the impact and consequences of that. And then thinking very much about the banding and the work that's happened there to support schools. So that was just a bit of a recap of some of the issues that came up in our earlier discussions. And then what I'm going to take you through, and Jeff, I'll hand over to you on this, because I know that you really enjoyed meeting with, I think it was about over 40 young people, wasn't it, at both Newham College and Newvic. And these were some of the kind of observations and feedback that they had given you.
Yes, thanks, Steph. Yes, I had the pleasure really of visiting both of the colleges, Newvic and Newham College, and also to talk to staff as well as the young people. So most of the young people I spoke with were in classes in Newvic, and in the Newham College. The young people I met were ones who actually had more severe, complex SEND. So I had quite a range of young people that I spoke with, and also, as I said, to get some very important information from the key staff in those both. Obviously, one of the reasons I wanted to go there and to see a reasonable number of young people was that, as those of you remember from the first meeting, we decided not to have a young person actually on the commission, because we were not convinced that that was the best way of getting young people's views, to be surrounded by a very large number of other people, older themselves, etc. So the important thing was actually to talk to young people, and I've met there are people, as you know, from earlier meetings where I've spoken to young people. So a lot of these comments are very sort of things that looking at the future and so on. These are ones that mostly of these, I think, were particularly from the first group at the Sixth Form College. Huge range of aspirations. Obviously, not all of these, should we say, are going to be viable, but important the way that the young people were talking about them and about their experiences in the college. And I just want to add, because there's a list here I think people can see, but also some points that, in addition, it was very important, I think, the issue of the transition from school, and there were issues about, as we've already heard, but also the whole question of the system and how there were delays and problems with the system of young people not necessarily having had EHCPs before they got into the college, and also the time taken and some of the issues about the commissioning of money to support individuals, which was actually personalised. And we have to remember that, as everybody will be, that we're talking about exceptional children here, young people here, where personalisation of the consideration of their special educational needs is particularly important. I'll just say that, given the time, Steph, on this, but it was very, very revealing when I went there to the two colleges.
Great, thanks, Jeff. I'll just move on then to the feedback that we've received from our settings. So I've just broken it down, and this is the work that Emma mentioned earlier. So there was a survey that went out to all of our settings, and we've kind of broken down the feedback that we've received, very much kind of focused on next steps and what we need to do more of. So you see here from our early years providers very much talking about that early notification process and that access to funding being really critical, but also that partnership working being instrumental in that stage for our young children. Comments here around kind of access to therapies, again, being critical, and that, again, that theme of kind of training and support very much coming through there. So then looking very, very high level, obviously, at the feedback that we received from mainstream schools, again, very similar, very much about the CPD and our training offer and awareness, but thinking about all staff in a setting and how critical it is that they all have exposure and that support. Again, very much around timely EHCP assessments, and I know we explored that in broader detail at one of the last commission sessions, and again, the timeliness of access to funding. So I think then looking at our resource provisions, that importance of really clear admissions criteria, and I know that that's some of the work that we're doing, thinking about the banding as well. That equity, and I think that's the point that Anthony raised earlier, so making sure there's real equity across our resource provisions, but also our mainstream schools, and again, that staff recruitment and support. So in terms of kind of observations that I guess all of our settings made, it was very much about us robustly quality assuring and monitoring our SEND provision, that being something that they felt was really important going forward. Very much thinking about therapy services and access to those, and how we build settings expertise, and also conduct that better transition planning. So as you just mentioned, Jeff, around particularly thinking about that transition into post-16, so strengthening that pathway and support. So then looking at our parental feedback, so we've taken this from two sessions, obviously one that was related to the survey that Emma conducted about our provision, and 27 parents came back to us with their thoughts and feedback on that. And then another session that Jeff held with parents of young people who were supported by the sensory service. So more details kind of feedback there. And again, kind of similar themes here, very much about access to therapies, thinking about our kind of ambition for our young people, especially as they enter adulthood, support that focuses on the whole family. So really interesting in the context of the work we're doing around our early help offer. But, you know, thinking about that support and provision that can be offered even to sibling groups. More specialist placements, so very much echoed some of the conversations we've had earlier, and that support around short breaks provision. A real sense that the inclusion feels like the right thing to do, but it needs to be genuine, and we need to ensure that our schools have the training and support that they need to really deliver that well. And again, a kind of focus on building the independence of our young people and their life skills, to make that experience in adulthood really, really positive and meaningful. And then, Jeff, should I hand over to you to talk a little bit about the parents you met with?
Okay, very briefly. Again, I also had the benefit of speaking with Keegan, who's the head of the service, as well as these four parents. And one of the things I like to stress is that I should say, I suppose, for a change, I actually got a lot of positive comments. So I've split them into the positive and the negative here, because it was very noticeable how pleased that the parents were about a number of things. Not all, as you see, there's negatives as well, but they were very positive about a number of things to do with this service. And I think the model of the service is very interesting in itself. But as you can see, some of the comments here, are very positive. There are still over negatives. I'll focus on the negatives now, but do invite you to see the positives. Again, the issue of assessment time taken and the EHCPs. There's a comment from a parent who's just come in to come into Newham and got a very young child and has been advised that it could take some time before anything happens, which is extraordinary for someone who I gather has very severe and profound difficulties. Issues to do with the experiences, but the service is conducting CPD within the schools. Of course, this is part of their offer to help mainstream teachers who are working with the youngsters who have significant sensory losses of either hearing impairment, visual impairment, or multisensory impairments. There is a particular issue for this group, of course, with specialist staff who are required to have specialist qualifications, and the loss of one teacher is really much more significant than is usually the case with SEND. I know it's for particular schools, but this for quite a proportion of the youngsters who have, say, very severe hearing loss. If getting teachers who have the qualifications is not easy. And I did meet with representatives of the RNIB, for example, some time ago.
Thanks, Jeff. And I'll just take us on to the next bit of feedback, which was from our health and social care professionals. So here there was kind of reflections on the real importance of investing in more inclusive universal and leisure services. And we know from earlier engagement with our young people in particular that was something they really asked us for. Delivery models that provide more equitable access to specialist services. And that was something that was felt within our health and social care system. A real kind of push again around our short breaks offer. So really wanting to see those wide range of opportunities for respite and family-based activities and support. A kind of comment here around the challenges in prioritising resources. So that real interest in investing in our early intervention offer and support, but also recognising the kind of high waiting times and volumes of referrals for statutory support, and that being a kind of important balance at the moment that services are having to strike. And lastly, a real strong kind of feeling that we need a clearer accountability framework as a system. So understanding how we are achieving that value for money across the system with that focus on equity. So I'm gonna stop there because I'm sure there are lots of comments in the chat and things that other people will want to feed back.
Okay, Orca, is this a new point or is this an old one? Do you want to raise a point?
Oh no, sorry, that's an old one. Pardon me, I'll take it down.
That's okay, no problem. Does anyone else have any comments? There's a lot of information from all this feedback there. I appreciate that.
Kirsty, did you want to come in there? I know you put a comment in the chat.
Oh, sorry, my chat's covering you as well now. move it somewhere else.
It's just, I'm not sure if Marion Laverne is on the call today. I just think there's this interesting dynamic in early years. So that's why I asked the question from professionals. Is it that they're saying that there's children with complex needs where they're not being diagnosed early enough? Because we know in early years that for less complex, we would say that it's not always appropriate to diagnose early. And if you spoke to Marion Levine around therapies, they actually work on a kind of, not rushing to diagnose. So I just think when we talk about early years and diagnosis, I think we need to be really clear what we're talking about, because it is not appropriate, especially around school readiness, to potentially label a child when that's not what's required. So I just think when we're talking about early years children and we're talking about assessment, EHCP and diagnosis, I think maybe some clarity from professionals around what that means. Because if they're saying they're not getting funding support, then is it linked to the early notification process and not accessing assessment place funding? Or are we talking about a delay? You know, we know there's a 2-year delay with therapies, but actually those children that are waiting a diagnosis are being filtered into some really good activity. So it would just be good to know what's underneath that, because it's not always appropriate to diagnose a child in the early years, is what Mariam would say back to that.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I think there's inevitably with the continuum of needs that young people have, but there are young people with areas of special educational needs which are identifiable very early, and you know, and we need the system to spread across the range from those where if you've got someone, let's say, with a profound hearing loss, there's no question that they're going to need some significant support. The nature of the support, as you say, with assessment placements and so on. So that's a really good point there. But we must remember the range of young people, children and young people with different sorts of needs and different severities of need as well. Tim and then Carleen, please.
Yeah, no, very briefly, just thank you. Really helpful presentation. And what struck me immediately, I suppose what's somewhat reassuring is just the similarities between what was presented and what was in a self-evaluation, but also in the feedback from Ofsted. So I think that triangulation is helpful for us to understand that we're identifying the right things to focus on, and that was to some extent reassuring, although clearly there are some really significant issues that have been identified. And just the other reflection is just the importance also of recognizing where there are strengths and really wanting the improvement work to build on some of those strengths, and looking at what characteristics in those stronger areas we can borrow from and use for those areas that are less strong. That was just my
Yes,
my
thanks,
thoughts.
Tim. Very, very important. Yes, Carleen.
Thank you, Chair. Just, I guess, a couple of things. One, it's really good to see the young people's feedback, and really that being the young people rather than children and families. I think that's really important because they have very much their own opinion about what it is that they feel and don't feel about a service. So that's really good. I just want to delve back into that granular detail piece that Kirsty was alluding to just a moment ago. And I guess part of me thinks, is the barriers there because we all know, whether we accept it or not, we all know that early diagnosis then brings better resources for children going forward. And obviously we have really, really long waiting lists, but often some children get lost in the midst of those waiting lists. But not just that, the impacts on families is completely different for one family to the next. And that need to maybe just get things ahead is something that families specifically will be asking for when they go into that early year setting. They want what they want right now because they have been told, they feel their own knowledge is that if you give me the support I need, I can then better advocate for my children. So there's a piece there in that moment of when we talk about SEND, but really needing to get into that granular detail, because when we automatically talk about SEND, especially here in Newham, we think very much ASD, complex needs, but we're not thinking, like you've said, about the other needs of young people, whether that's physical disability, whether that's an emotional disability, whether that's a mental health disability. We're not thinking about those other things. So I guess would it be right in saying, Chair, that maybe we need to be specific about what it is that we're talking about, so therefore those lines will then mean what it needs to mean for that specific setting. Then the perception won't be that we're missing anybody at any point in time. I'm just trying to think outside the box of why an early years setting would feel like how they feel. And I would think a lot of that would be in regards to parental responses to those settings about what it is that they need. But it's a bigger system, isn't it? It's the whole system's approach we need to think about. And even though we may need to do what we need to do within a certain setting, if we don't have the support of, for instance, health for diagnosis, it can then build barriers. So I just wanted to ease that out in regards to that granular detail.
Yeah. No, thanks very much for that, Colleen. Yeah, I mean, I think it touches a bit on what I was saying just now. There's in my view, there's an important issue about the use of the word diagnosis, and this is a complex issue. I mean, to diagnose someone as complex hearing loss, and I'll use that as I used it before, is relatively straightforward. It doesn't necessarily mean that the youngster will be the same as everybody else who's been diagnosed with profound hearing loss. And there's a continuum of needs, and there's a continuum of different sorts of SEN. And Newham is interesting for me, as coming from a different areas across different parts of the country and so on, to see the kind of focus very heavily on ASD, for example, which is very important. But of course, there are other areas of special educational needs which are important as well. So the balance between early intervention is complex, but certainly communication skills are required from early on. So I don't want to kind of start getting into the details, but I think your point is absolutely important. And in fact, one of the things that I've discussed with Steph is perhaps another meeting, or not another, but a meeting with the community, the autism and communication. There's a working group, I gather, that's on, and I haven't met anybody from there. But I think that's so important in Newham as well as other places, that I need to have a clearer idea of that, as well as the point you're making about the whole, the question about the whole system and how we address different types of needs in different ways, which are providing confidence for the teachers and actually effectiveness for the young children, and as we're talking about early childhood. I think I better stop there because I think we're moving on a bit. I just got an item on the Ofsted update, and that's just really because it's on. It wasn't appropriate not to have it on, but as I gather, unless anything's changed, we're still Newham's still waiting for the Ofsted letter, I think it's called, rather than a report. And it was really just to kind of note that. Tim, I don't know if you want to say anything other than that, but obviously it's not appropriate for us to discuss anything on it.
No, thanks, Jeff. And I think in actual fact, the majority of people on this call have been either part of the inspection itself or certainly were party to some of the feedback that was provided informally post-inspection. You're right, we are still waiting for the draft letter, which might come this week or next because of Christmas. I think just the timetable shifted a little bit. We then have 10 working days as a partnership to respond with any factual accuracy comments. We then get the final letter, which we should get in February, briefly before it's then published. We are arranging a series of engagement meetings with parents, young people, stakeholders to talk about the feedback from Ofsted. But also talk about the process of what happens next. So the aim is to have a series of engagement events to develop our written statement of action. So that is co-produced with parents, with young people, with stakeholders from the start. And from the point of the publication of the letter, we have 70 working days before we need to submit that written statement of action.
Thanks very much, Tim. Okay, I think we should move on to item 5, the group discussion. Steph, would you like to organise us?
I will, and as we've been doing for the last few commission sessions, we're going to break out into, I'm just thinking at the size of the group, maybe 3 groups would be appropriate for us. And just thinking about, I think in first instance, some of the short-term things that we think we could put in place to address the issues that we've heard today, and then a discussion on some of the longer term kind of strategic plans that we want to progress as a partnership. I know a lot of them have been mentioned, but I think it's good to reflect on it post hearing some of that that feedback that we've had from young people and wider colleagues too. So hopefully Zoom will work for me, and you should all get an invite to join a breakout session in about 30 seconds. And we'll have about 15 minutes for this. So if we try and divide that up into 7 and a bit minutes on the short term and another 7 and a bit on the long term, that would be fabulous. And then we'll come back and feedback.
Steph, forgive me. I'm about to go into that group, but I was just, can I just message you? Yeah.
Gower, are you able to get into one of the groups? Would you like me to assign you again? Let me just see. And Louise, I'll invite you into the group that I join so that we're able to capture that feedback there.
Sorry, can't hear me. I just wondered whether I'd be able to take a 5-minute break. Normally there would be 2 interpreters.
Don't worry,
so I'm struggling a little bit now. So yeah, normally for this kind of thing, you'd have to have 2 interpreters. So
yeah, no problem. Take a break, please do.
Thank you.
Gower, it is telling me that you have joined the session, but let me try allocating you to a slightly different room and see if that works. Is anything appearing on your screen, Gower? Great. And then Anita, if you want to message me on Skype, that's fine.
You're offline at the moment, Steph. Thank you. I'll go now. You're muted, Sarah.
Yeah, we are the first back, I think.
Oh, right. Okay. I thought perhaps we were still in the break. I'm thinking, well, what button did I press that was wrong?
Hi everyone, thank you very much. I know there were some excellent discussions going on, and just I guess quick 5 minutes for us to kind of feedback then. So group one, would anyone in group one like to summarize their discussion?
Yep, Steph, I think I'll pick up on just a couple of key points.
Brilliant.
Group one. The first one, which has become through as a big theme of today, is the accuracy of the data, and how, you know, really getting a grip of that, and not just a services data, but thinking of it a bit more systemically about how we really get a grip on maximising the use of the intelligence available to us across the partnership to support future planning, really, in the medium and long term. So that, we think, is has to be an absolute short-term priority. Which links very closely with provision and resource, and then and linked also to transitions as well. So what we thought was quite important is, as we're planning for the next step, short, medium and long term, not perhaps putting preparation for adulthood for a bit later on, but really seeing it in the whole round. So the importance of preparation for adulthood and transitions throughout. And just look at, and I think so, just taking an overall systemic view at all things. So think lots of work happens in schools and colleges and nurseries, but actually thinking much wider than that, what takes place in the holidays, for example, at some of our short breaks providers, and how we pull all of that together as a form of intelligence, if you like, to support future planning.
Great, thank you very much, Anita. And anyone from group two like to feedback?
Yeah, I'm happy to feedback for group two. So our short-term ideas, or again, I'll just give you the highlights, were really about setting our expectations for schools and settings and being really clear about that. And then understanding our challenge, but also our support to those schools and settings about who we expect to be placed, but making sure that we get that right with looking at profiles for particular settings. And then in the longer term, I guess it was, or the mid to longer term, was trying to understand some of those barriers to schools and settings accepting placements of children, and then putting things in place to tackle those, to overcome those barriers. And so I guess, you know, that building on that element of support.
Great, thank you, Emma. And group three.
Hi, Steph. We had a really good conversation about short and long-term ambitions. And I think communication just came out really, really loud and clear in all areas of the discussion. We spoke about strengthening the communication between the 0 to 25 team and parents and carers and families, and also with schools and SENCOs. And kind of just unpack some of the possibilities about how that might happen, surgeries, drop-ins, just communication. We also spoke about the newsletter and the potential reach of the Inclusions Matter newsletter, the potential for that to be to kind of be a system-wide method of communication, and the real importance of that being inclusive and accessible, making sure that it really is inclusive in the way it's delivered. Longer term, well, short and longer term EHCP timeliness was a key issue, and again the communication around that, giving parents and carers and practitioners in the field, up-to-date information about what's happening. We spoke about tracking what's happening in that space through a portal, and the difference that could make, and also about diagnosis and kind of the difference in the children, young people space in comparison to adults, about whether or not there is a diagnosis and how working diagnoses fit into that.
Great, thank you very much. Jeff, do we want to move on to our next? Oh, I think you might be muted. Don't worry, I think I can.
Yeah,
I can
sorry,
go for
sorry
it.
about that. I never touched anything. It went away. Sorry. No, I was just saying, are we doing accountability as well, or is that included?
I think so, but we've overrun a tiny bit, so I suggest that this maybe be one that we do in the rounds. But this question really, I think, came up during our discussions and our focus groups as part of the local area SEND inspection.
Yeah.
But is also something that was fed back, I think, by all partners, which was this idea of an accountable system.
Yeah.
And what does an accountable system look like, or what do we want it to look like in the future? And I think, you know, this is our last theme session, and I know we're going to cover in a bit, you know, other things that we might want to cover before the Commission reports. But getting those principles of an accountable system is going to be really important to us taking this work forward.
Yeah, but you're suggesting we do it as a plenary now then?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, all right. So we'll so item 6, an accountable system. Any comments about that? I'm sure people got ideas about that. What does accountability look like?
Can even start with, what does the word accountable evoke in you? When you heard that, an accountable system, how did that make you feel?
Yeah. Okay, Kirsty, you've
I started to talk about it and then we got cut off. I think it's, so I give an example where there's actually a school that's desperate to support more children. And actually what's happened is, especially beyond COVID, some other parental challenge around kind of behaviours. My child keeps getting hurt at school, and how the school supports those conversations with the families of children that haven't got SEND. So I think we focus a lot on the children with SEND. Actually, from the experiences I'm having, especially with schools, is they have this battle of, do I lose 4 parents or keep the child there? And they are genuinely in a place of quite upset about it. They want to keep the child. So I think it's that narrative that some schools, and I think Sandy articulated it really well, we want to support the child, and as an authority we need to support the schools to enable them to do that. And I think how we support the schools, especially around other parents, and I joke aside, but I did say, if the parent wants to complain about your school and wants to raise it with me, I'm more than happy for them to do so. But it is that pressure, especially when you're talking about low roles and funding. It's the pressure of keeping other people happy, which sounds terrible, but that is the real world. So as an accountability question, Steph, I take accountability for the fact that we are asking schools to take these children in an inclusive way, and we need to support them to do that and to retain that, so that there isn't a breakdown in that provision. And I see that as we are accountable for doing that as a local authority. It's not just the school's business to do that.
Thanks, Kirsty. And Sandy, did you want to come in there?
Yes, please. I think we need to think about who we're accountable to, and that's a range of people, obviously, organisations. And when it comes to funding, you know, there's got to be a certain level of scrutiny that schools should expect from those providing the funding, and quite rightly so. And that usually comes down to facts and figures and statistics and outcomes, but actually schools only succeed in these situations by building the relationship with the parents, which obviously, from what Kirsty said, it can be a real problem when that breaks down. And the relationship with the parent possibly can make or break the situation. And I can certainly vouch for the fact that we work very hard in our setting to build those relationships, because we are different and parents don't understand how we can support their child with SEND, even if it's not diagnosed and got a plan. We know that happens a lot for AP, and we're working and building that relationships, and then we get the good feedback, we get the positive comments from the parents, and the child, I would say by and large, gets the best outcomes they can from the circumstances. And that's an accountability that I think needs to be fed into the system. It's not just about pounds and pence and results for GCSEs. It's also about where they go on to as well, at whatever point, any of those transition points, what the next phase is. And sometimes we need to actually take a bigger picture, because you may not see the successful outcome until they've left that particular setting for a couple of years, because it speaks to how well they've got on in the next phase and how well they've succeeded. Now, that's a big task, but I think that recognizing that is part of it, and that actually the parents are the key focal point for all of that, and how they feel about how things have turned out, and of course the young person as well.
Thanks, Andy, and really interesting listening to that, thinking about, do we go back and do that learning? So if a child or young person ends up in alternative provision and you've found that their needs haven't been met throughout the course of their educational journey, how do we then learn from that as a system so that doesn't happen, you know, again for another child? So really interesting to think about how we do that. And Tessa, would you like to come in?
Yeah, hi. I think accountability for services is also about, as long as everything everyone else said, keeping records, evaluations, feedback, assessing, appraising performance, you know, holding people accountable for the things that they do, the way that they relate to families. Those sorts of things for me are the foundations for trust. It makes us, it builds that perception of reliability, like, you know, parents can rely on us as service providers, you know, transparency and communication. So, you know, we need to, like, in terms of the data and things like that, they need to be up to date, they need to be relevant, they need to be looking at the right things, we need to be learning from the feedback and the evaluation of our families as professionals all the time. And I think that's one of the priorities that needs to be implemented actually across the board, is that not just snapshots but continuous evaluation, so that we can actually hold ourselves accountable.
Thanks, Tessa. Gow, I can see you've got your hand up, and then Tim. Oh, I think you might be muted, Gower.
Yeah, just that accountability for me is when a child is diagnosed, yeah, primary school is the best years of your life. And if we don't get that foundation right and the support right there, then you're going to have more problems in secondary school. Then you're going to have problems in college. So I always say we was lucky. He had a wonderful primary school, Cleves. The only thing for me was changes is you have so many hospital appointments, yeah, so that continuous schooling, he missed a lot of gaps, but the support he did have at primary and secondary was amazing. And yes, we had some gaps, but we was able to quickly put in the work. So then that gaps, and again, communication, that parent, child, staff, collectively, we need to all work together, all work on the same page for that child to achieve their utmost. You don't get that time back again. Yeah, and by excluding a child, for me, I think it's the worst thing a school can do. Whatever the problem, it is about working things together and quickly when they occur, so that things, you know, things improve. And that's accountability. Every SEND child should come out doing well. And it's about putting in things in place to support that child, whatever their disability. No excuse. And, you know, the council is there. I know it's working hard. You've got loads of wonderful staff. Diagnosis is a lot more better now. Speech and language, all of the therapies, to make, you know, every SEND child to have a wonderful childhood, really. Yeah.
Thanks, Gower. I love that idea that those are the best years and that we want to make them truly memorable for our children. It was Tim and then Hugh, I think.
Steph, yeah, seemed like a long time ago now, those best years. No, thank you. I think there's a couple of things to this. I think it's both about the transparency that we offer around whether it's data, whether it's about the resources that are available, whether it's about the assessment of needs versus provision. But it's also, I think, that culture of trust that we talked about. So that ability for us to have open and honest communication. But also, I think there's something around the role of quality assurance and our commitment to learning. So I think it's a range of different elements that are critical. But yeah, no, I think that you need them all to create an accountable system.
Thanks, Tim. Hugh, would you like to come in there?
Yeah, it's just the issue of accountability. I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that there are various national accountability frameworks which schools struggle with sometimes in some areas. One of the most common requests that my team receives when we're getting towards the collection and publication of Key Stage 2 results is, can we remove our SEN children from the results that are to be published? And the answer is no, you can't, and there are good reasons why. But schools clearly feel that pressure of the way in which their results are being distorted, or as they feel distorted, by the SEN children that they have. Well, if we take them away, we'll have a completely different set of results. Why can't we do it, is what they always want to ask us. And there are some ways of compensating for that, when those are decisions which governments and others have taken not to go down. I can remember thinking back to Sandy's comments. I can remember coming into Education Link, Sandy, and looking at a system which presented an alternative analysis of results data, which was something called contextual value analysis, which took into account the characteristics of pupils. Education Link switched from being, when you did that kind of analysis, it switched from being an institution which had, given the numbers of pupils, fairly low apparent performance, to one which actually was looking really good when you compared it with other institutions nationally. So there are some ways in which you can control for some of these effects. We can't just forget that there are national frameworks, national accountability systems which are in place, which we all will simply have to live with and do have distorting effects. And I don't know how to take my hand down. How do I do that?
There should be a little bit on the side of your chat which helps you do that. But don't worry, I'll remember it as a legacy hand if it stays there.
I've managed it now.
Jeff, I'm going to hand back over to you now, but thank you. I've been scribbling away, and I know that Eldon is writing our minutes very comprehensively, so all these ideas will be captured.
Okay.
Sorry, I had my hand up, Steph, about accountability. I do apologize.
Sorry, Adiola, I didn't see it. Go for it.
Accountability based on what I think Sandy and what you just said, really and truly, and what Goa said. As a SEN parent, is when you have all the records and you can see the trajectory of a SEN child. Example, when you look outside most schools, they give you 5 GCSEs, 3 GCSEs, but where are our children going? Where's the progression route for them? What are the aspiration levels? Just like what Goa was saying, and even everything that Tessa has said. And the other part of accountability is even within the system itself. Yes, I know leadership is changing and things, but it has to be, first of all, within departments themselves. Health, SEND, education, all the partners are accountable to each other, whereby when we have an EXP plan, like what Tim is about, quality assurance, we can see in there clearly that all the partners are on that table and they've been able to have a holistic view of that child. So that will be the evidence that you know what is happening all around. So it's not just about leadership, we're going to follow everybody together, we're working together. But the most important is, where are the children going? Where's the data from the schools? What is happening to them? Where we can see, we can see our children thriving and doing things outside there. So that's the definition of accountability from a SEN perspective as a parent.
Thank you very much, Adiola.
Okay. Right, so we're just coming up to the end. So I just want to say what was going to be happening next. So the idea is that we've got one more meeting, that's the intention. And what we're planning is that I'll be drafting a report from the Commission. So it will be from the Commission as a whole. That's the idea. That's why it's important that it comes to you. And I agreed with Tim and Anita at the beginning that this wouldn't be a very long treatise about all sorts of things. It would be something which would try to kind of capture where we are. So what I'm planning, and we've just had preliminary discussions on this, and so there are more to come. So this is a sort of general outline of what I'm planning to do to kind of give you an idea, but it is open to some discussion later. So I think it's important to kind of explain why why Newham felt that it was important to have a commission. What's the rationale for it? But then where, in a sense, where were we? Where was Newham back in the sort of late spring last year? Where we started, and where, as you remember, the first thing that I did was to go and meet a lot of people to really talk with them and try and understand what everyone's, across the board, parents, various systems within the authority and the health service, etc., just what were the issues? What were people concerned about? I was hoping for more people saying what they liked. There wasn't so much of that. It was much more on, as you can imagine, on the challenges that were faced. So that's the kind of where we were. But I think, as has come up in the meeting, one of the things I was very keen on is that what the Commission didn't just kind of have its own little bit of time bubble, that everything stood still and we carried on with our Commission, and then something happened at the end. But while I was working and the Commission was working, that how I would be feeding in and discussing with the authority, Tim and Anita and Jessica and others, what was coming out, so that there was a process that brought in all these different sets of information across the board, and the authority can pick things that they saw as particularly relevant, important priorities, etc. And you've heard and had reports today and before on what's been happening in that space. And that's been going on. And now the issue is really, well, what happens next? Because it isn't just a question of sort of saying, well, this is what things were like, isn't it bad? There's a few good points. It's saying what's going to happen. It won't be for the Commission to come up with, let's call it a strategic plan, i.e. a very detailed, specific set of issues of this is how we're going to address this, this is what we do with the HCP planning and so on. It's trying to capture where we move in terms of principles and the basic kind of ideas that we want to promote into the future, with not to be very woolly and kind of hand-waving kind of stuff, but stuff which was realistic. It took note of people, everyone on the Commission, and all the other people that we've met with different voices. But it's all meant to be fairly punchy. It's not meant to be a kind of a long treatise, as I said. And at the moment, what I'm thinking of is basing this very much on the Commission's meetings. So at the beginning, we came up with those 4 main areas of focus. And as you know, today it was on funding and finance, although we've talked more widely, and the other 3 as well. And that may be one way of structuring this, so that it kind of, it's sort of in bite-sized pieces, and we can try and make it as accessible for the people of Newham, going beyond ourselves. So that's a kind of an idea. So that's giving us a few weeks, and I think, Steph, we did pencil in a date for the next meeting, but I don't know if that was finalised yet.
We've penciled in the 1st of March, so in about a month's time, for us to come back together and look at that initial outline. I think it is, Jeff, of that report. I know that we're obviously going to have lots of other things going on in the next few weeks and months, So I'll put it in the diary, but just to make colleagues aware that we may have to be a bit flexible with dates.
Yeah. So that's the kind of general idea. There may be one or two other activities. We were talking, for example, about some other meetings with some parents of in different groups, you know, linked with, say, voluntary bodies like the National Deaf Children's Society, as an example. But you know, that hasn't been planned yet. It's just been kind of raised as a possibility. And also, as I think Steph mentioned, one of the things I'd like to get a bit more kind of whole take on is the whole autism ASD issue, because there's a lot going on. There's a working group, I gather, and I think we're going to organise a time to actually meet with this working group, hopefully. So it's going to be a bit challenging to get this done in the next in the next month, but that's the idea, and we'll see how we go, I think. And I say I think I'll be meeting Tim with you and with Nita as well, so that we can get it. So the point, I think the other thing just to say is, one of the strengths of what Newham did was to appoint an independent chair. So I am out of the system. Obviously, I've got a lot of experience nationally and internationally, but I also working, and I do believe very much in co-working and coordination and all those things. And so I'm not sort of very precious about my thinking. This is something which ultimately is our thinking. And so there's a process of how we do that, which kind of identifies other people as priorities, you know, to make sure that they're in there somewhere, because I might have kind of underestimated something that's come through. So there's a number of thoughts. As you can see, it's kind of still a bit fluid as to what's happening and how I'm thinking of doing it. But that kind of, I hope that gives you a bit of an idea about the way I want to do it. Not just go away, lock myself in a room and produce a report and give it to Tim and Anita, but actually to engage with us. And then this group, the commission, will have a chance to engage with that report as well. Okay. I think that's it then, Steph. I don't think we've got anything else.
Yeah, perfect timing there, Jeff. Bang on time.
Okay. If there are any other, is there any other business? Because I know we want to go now. But no? Okay, well, can I thank everyone? Tremendous contributions today as ever. Thanks very much. It's hugely impressive to see all the the commitment and ideas here. So thanks everyone, and look forward to seeing you for the final meeting.
Thank
you.
you.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.